In the spring of 1953, the most photographed woman in Britain was not the Queen. She was the Queen's younger sister, and she was standing slightly behind her at every public occasion, wearing a better dress, smoking a cigarette with the practiced ease of someone who had decided very early that if the role assigned to her was going to be suffocating, she was at least going to look extraordinary while it happened. Her name was Princess Margaret Rose, and the British press had already decided what she was: a party girl, a scandal, a cautionary tale in pearls and evening gloves. What the press had not bothered to document was the administrative machinery that had been quietly built around her since birth. The machinery designed not to support her, but to contain her. What the historical record shows, when you read it end to end across 5 decades of correspondence, royal warrants, palace memoranda, and the testimony of people who actually worked alongside her, is something the tabloid version of Margaret never quite captured. A woman of considerable intelligence and capability who was handed nothing of substance to do, who was offered, instead, a rotating series of patronages so carefully selected for their ceremonial emptiness that they could generate no political consequence, no independent power base, and no public identity that did not route directly back through the palace press office, who spent 50 years being the warning shot. The warning fired whenever any other member of the royal family looked like they might step outside the lines. Join me to find out. Margaret Rose was born on the August 21st, 1930, at Glamorous Castle in Angus, Scotland, the ancestral seat of the Bowes-Lyon family. She was the second daughter of the Duke and Duchess of York, which at the moment of her birth meant she was fourth in line to the throne behind her uncle, the Prince of Wales, her father, and her elder sister, Elizabeth. Fourth in line sounds close. In 1930, it was not close at all. The Prince of Wales was 36 years old, vigorous, glamorous, the most celebrated royal figure in the world, and entirely expected to marry, produce children, and occupy the throne for the next 4 decades. Margaret's father was 34 and healthy. Her sister Elizabeth, born 4 years earlier in 1926, was already being prepared by the palace machinery for the role of a senior royal. Margaret's position, in the autumn of 1930, was that of a younger daughter of a second son of a king. Thoroughly royal, thoroughly comfortable, thoroughly peripheral. Her earliest years were, by the accounts of those closest to the family, genuinely happy ones. The York household, unlike the main palace establishment, ran on something approaching warmth. The Duke and Duchess of York were not the cold, ceremonial parents that the British royal tradition had produced in previous generations. They were present. They read to their daughters. They played games with them. They ate meals together with a regularity that was, by the standards of Edwardian royal parenting, practically revolutionary. Margaret grew up in that household as the bright one, the quick one, the funny one. Her elder sister was steadier, more diligent, more naturally patient. Margaret was sharper at the edges. She could imitate anyone in the room within minutes of meeting them. She absorbed music instinctively, possessed a genuine soprano voice that her tutors identified early as the real thing, and read with a voraciousness and a retention that her childhood tutors consistently noted in their reports. Marion Crawford, the governess who spent 17 years with the family and later wrote a memoir that the palace never forgave her for publishing, described Margaret at 6 years old as a small, insistent person who could not be bored and would not be managed. Crawford meant it as a compliment. The palace, in the decades that followed, would come to see it as the problem. Then Edward VIII abdicated, and everything changed at once. On the December 11th, 1936, Margaret's uncle signed the instrument of abdication and walked out of the monarchy for an American divorcee named Wallace Simpson. Her father, the stammering, anxious, deeply reluctant Duke of York, became King George VI. Her mother became Queen Consort. Her sister Elizabeth became the heir presumptive, and Margaret, 10 years old, became the spare. Not just any spare, the spare of the most scrutinized monarchy in the world at the moment it had just suffered the most destabilizing constitutional crisis of the 20th century. The palace had just watched one royal follow his personal desires over his institutional obligations and nearly bring the entire structure down. The lesson drawn, at the deepest level of the establishment's instincts, was not subtle. Personal desire was the enemy. Institutional obligation was the point, and anyone who looked like they might be tempted to forget that distinction would need to be handled very carefully indeed. Margaret was 10. The lesson was already waiting for her. Elizabeth received targeted instruction in constitutional history, in the workings of Parliament, in the legal frameworks of the Crown. She was being prepared for something specific. Margaret received a more general version of the same curriculum, minus the constitutional specificity, plus additional music and art, because there was no particular destination she was being prepared for. She was, as she would later describe herself in private conversation to friends, educated for a role that nobody had actually designed. The war arrived when Margaret was 9 and reshaped her adolescence entirely. The royal family remained in Britain throughout, a decision driven by George VI and the Queen Consort over the protests of the government, and one that generated the public capital the monarchy spent on goodwill for the next 3 decades. Margaret spent the war years at Windsor, with her sister, cut off from the social world that her age and temperament would normally have been navigating. She was bright, bored, and already developing the conversational intensity that would define her adult persona. She read everything available. She played the piano with the disciplined seriousness of someone who understood she was genuinely good at it. She performed in the Windsor pantomimes alongside Elizabeth, playing comic roles with a natural timing that surprised everyone who saw her do it. She also watched, from a very short distance, what the monarchy required of her sister, and she watched what it had done to her father. George VI was not a well man during the war years, and everyone in the household knew it. The stammer that had defined his public life was a symptom, not the cause. He suffered from anxiety of a severity that his doctors managed carefully and his family managed protectively, and the weight of a kingship he had never wanted pressed down on him with a consistency that aged him faster than his years. He died in 1952 at 56 years old. Margaret was 21 when she lost him. By that point, she had already fallen in love with the man who would trigger the first, and in many ways the defining act of institutional management her family and the establishment would deploy against her. Group Captain Peter Townsend was 38 years old, a decorated RAF pilot, a Battle of Britain veteran, and a man who had served as equerry to George VI since 1944. He was also, by the time Margaret was 19 and beginning to move through the upper levels of royal social life, separated from his wife and seeking a divorce. The relationship developed slowly and almost entirely within the household. Margaret and Townsend spent years in proximity before either of them acknowledged what was building between them. By 1952, the acknowledgement had been made. By early 1953, the year of the coronation, the relationship was known within the palace. Margaret, aged 22, wished to marry a man her family, the government, and the Church of England all found unacceptable. Not because Townsend was without distinction. His war record was exemplary. His character was, by every account, genuinely admirable. He was unacceptable because he was a divorced man, and Margaret's sister was the Supreme Governor of the Church of England, an institution whose canonical position on the remarriage of divorced persons was, in 1953, one of total prohibition. The Prime Minister at the time was Winston Churchill. He was succeeded in April 1955 by Anthony Eden, who was himself divorced and remarried. An irony that would have been funnier if it had not been Eden's government that ultimately delivered the formal verdict. The constitutional mechanism brought to bear against Margaret was the Royal Marriages Act of 1772. an ancient piece of legislation requiring that members of the royal family obtain the sovereign's consent to marry before the age of 25. Margaret was 22 in 1953. She could not marry without her sister's formal approval. Her sister, advised by the Prime Minister, advised by the Cabinet, advised by the Archbishop of Canterbury, did not give it. Townsend was dispatched to Brussels as an heir attaché. The physical removal of the inconvenient man from the proximity of the inconvenient woman was arranged with the speed that the establishment reserves for problems it has decided to solve rather than consider. Margaret was told to wait. She waited. She turned 25 in August 1955. The Royal Marriages Act no longer applied. She could, legally, marry Townsend without the Queen's consent, provided she accepted the consequences, which, under the Act, meant forfeiting her royal status, her income from the civil list, and her place in the public life she had been raised to inhabit. She could have him or the crown, not both. On the October 31st, 1955, Margaret issued a statement through Clarence House. It was composed with her own participation, in consultation with the palace, and it said that she had decided not to marry Peter Townsend, having been mindful of the Church and Commonwealth. The statement was 2 sentences long. It ended a relationship of several years in a paragraph that read like a press release, because it was a press release, and because the mechanism of the monarchy had determined that this was how it would end. And Margaret had concluded, at 25 years old, that she did not have the resources to fight the mechanism and win. What is less often noted in the warm retrospective accounts of this period that tend to emphasize the tragedy of the romance is what happened next. Nothing happened next. No role was created for Margaret in the aftermath of her sacrifice. No expanded portfolio of serious work was offered in recognition of what she had given up. No acknowledgement was made, at any institutional level, that a young woman of evident intelligence and capability had just demonstrated the precise quality the monarchy most needed from its members, namely the subordination of personal desire to institutional requirement, and that this demonstration might be rewarded with something more than continued ceremonial irrelevance. She had done what was asked of her. The establishment banked it and moved on. The patronages began arriving in the 1950s and continued accumulating through the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s until the list ran to over 80 organizations, which sounds substantial until you examine what the organizations were and what Margaret's role within them actually consisted of. She was president of the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children from 1954. She was patron of the Scottish Children's League, patron of the Victoria League for Commonwealth Friendship, president of the Girl Guides Association from 1965, patron of the Dockland Settlements, president of the Sunshine Homes for Blind Babies, president of the Halley Orchestra, patron of the London College of Music, president of the Royal Ballet. The list goes on. What is notable about it, when you read it carefully, is not its length, but its composition. The organizations fall into 2 categories. The first is charities of the old-fashioned welfare variety, established institutions doing genuinely useful work with vulnerable populations, which Margaret's patronage helped fund through the social access she provided, but which required no policy knowledge, no administrative authority, no independent judgment. She attended the dinners. She smiled at the galas. She wrote the letters. The charity cashed the donations that her presence had attracted, and everyone went home. The second category is cultural organizations, principally in the performing arts, and this is where the official record becomes interesting. Margaret was not a ceremonial patron of the arts, in the way that the word patron tends to imply. She knew what she was talking about. She had studied piano seriously since childhood, possessed the musical literacy that comes from sustained technical practice, and had the kind of instinctive feel for performance that cannot be acquired by reading program notes. People who worked with her in the arts world during the 1960s and 1970s consistently reported an engagement that went well beyond the royal visit. She asked real questions. She remembered things from previous visits. she pushed back when she disagreed. Roy Strong, the art historian and museum director who served as director of the Victoria and Albert Museum from 1974 to 1987, knew Margaret well through the cultural world. They both inhabited and wrote about her in his published diaries, with the particular frankness that diaries permit. His account describes a woman who could have run a serious arts organization if anyone had ever given her the authority to do so. What she was given instead was the presidency, which is the title without the power, the invitation without the chair at the table where decisions are made. The pattern was consistent across 50 years. Every serious capability she demonstrated was met with a patronage. Every patronage was designed to channel that capability into something socially useful and institutionally harmless. And the accumulated effect across 5 decades of this treatment was a woman who became progressively more aware that the system surrounding her was not designed to use her but to manage her, and who responded to that awareness in the ways that people generally respond when they understand they are being contained. She became difficult. She was already entertaining. She became devastating. She drank. She smoked cigarettes with a theatrical commitment that became its own form of performance. She stayed up until 4 a.m. at dinner parties, attended by artists and writers and musicians, conducting conversations of a quality that her guests consistently remembered as exceptional because the dinner party was the one arena where no one had thought to appoint a committee to oversee her. She also, in 1960, married. Antony Armstrong-Jones was a photographer. He was 30 years old in 1960, the son of a Welsh barrister, educated at Eton and Cambridge, and professionally at the top of a field that was, in 1960, just beginning to be taken seriously as an art form in Britain rather than a trade. He was charming, creative, sexually complicated, in ways that his biographers have documented carefully, and entirely outside the social world the palace would have designed for Margaret if the palace had been designing her romantic life, which it was not, because it had already made one attempt to manage her romantic life and produced a national newspaper crisis that lasted 2 years. She proposed. He accepted. They married at Westminster Abbey on the May 6, 1960. Armstrong-Jones was given the title Earl of Snowdon on the morning of the wedding, because a princess could not, by the conventions of the time, be seen to marry a commoner, and so the commoner was ennobled overnight, like a theatrical prop changed between acts. The marriage produced 2 children, David, Viscount Linley, born in 1961, Sarah Armstrong-Jones, born in 1964, and it was, by the testimony of virtually everyone who observed it closely, over 18 years, a sustained disaster of a specific kind. 2 people of considerable ego, considerable creativity, and considerable private unhappiness living in an institution designed to regulate one of them and which had no framework for the other. Snowdon, as Armstrong-Jones became, was not a man who adjusted easily to secondary status. He was brilliant in his field and accustomed to being the most interesting person in rooms that did not contain his wife. In rooms that did contain her, the dynamics shifted in ways he found progressively intolerable. He developed a habit of private cruelty that has been documented in the biographies of both parties, most notably in Anne de Courcy's 2008 biography of Snowdon himself. He left notes in places where Margaret would find them. The notes were not affectionate. Margaret had affairs. Snowdon had affairs. The marriage became, in the language of the palace press office, a private matter. And the language of the palace press office means that it was a matter in which the palace had decided not to intervene because intervention would generate worse coverage than silence. They separated in 1976. They divorced in 1978, making Margaret the first senior royal to divorce since the monarchy had deployed the indissolubility of marriage as one of the primary reasons for refusing to let her marry Townsend in 1955. The irony was noted. It was not acknowledged. The years between the Townsend decision and the Snowdon divorce span roughly 20 years, and across those 20 years, the tabloid version of Margaret's life was being written in a very particular register. The party photographs, the Caribbean holidays, the Mustique trips, the Roddy Llewellyn affair, in which a man 17 years younger than Margaret became, for several years in the mid-1970s, the primary news story attached to her name. Llewellyn was a landscape gardener. He was 25 when the relationship began, and Margaret was 43. The British press treated the affair with the moral outrage that the British press reserves for royal behavior it has decided is beneath dignity, which is a curious institutional position for newspapers that had spent the previous 15 years publishing photographs of her at parties and complaining that she was frivolous. The press's complaint about Margaret, which ran from approximately 1955 until the end of her active public life in the late 1990s, was internally contradictory in a way that nobody much bothered to resolve. She was simultaneously too visible and too absent, too glamorous and insufficiently serious, too extravagant and not royal enough. The criticism shifted its grounds constantly, which is what criticism does when its actual target is not the specific behavior being cited, but the existence of the person exhibiting any behavior at all. What the press was actually documenting, without understanding it was doing so, was the behavior of an intelligent woman with no defined role and no legitimate outlet for the capabilities she possessed. The parties were not evidence of frivolity. They were evidence of a woman who had found the one arena she could not be supervised. The drinking was not evidence of weakness. It was evidence of what 50 years of managed irrelevance does to a person who started with the potential for something else. The affairs were not evidence of recklessness. They were evidence that the personal domain was the only domain where the warrant of the institution did not run. None of this is to excuse behavior that hurt people. Her children have spoken, in careful and measured terms, about a household that was not always easy to grow up inside. The Snowdon marriage was unhappy in ways that had consequences beyond the two principals. Margaret was not, by the accounts of those who loved her and those who found her impossible, a uniformly easy person. But the tabloid version of her life, which reached its most toxic levels in the mid-1970s and which has calcified into the received account of who she was, strips away the institutional context entirely. It presents the behavior without the conditions that produced it. It offers the photograph without the 50 years of managed powerlessness that stand behind the woman in the frame. That is not biography, it is caption writing. The health problems began accumulating in the 1990s. Margaret suffered a stroke in 1998 while on holiday in Mustique, a trip the tabloids had already framed as evidence of self-indulgence before the medical emergency occurred. Because the frame was already set and the emergency was merely inconvenient for the narrative. A further series of strokes followed. She lost the use of her left side to a significant degree. She lost much of her eyesight after scalding her feet in a bathing accident in 1999, which left her with further neurological complications. She died on the 9th of February 9th, 2002, at the age of 71, 6 weeks before her mother, the Queen Mother, died at the age of 101. The obituaries produced by the British press were a masterpiece of the form. They managed to be simultaneously affectionate and condescending, to mourn a woman they had spent 50 years mocking, to identify her tragedy while declining to name its cause, and to arrive at the conclusion that she had wasted her potential without asking who had held the door of potential shut. The Times noted her glamour, the Guardian noted the parties, the Telegraph noted the Townsend affair and the Snowdon divorce. Almost none of them noted the 83 official patronages, the decades of public engagements, the hospital visits, the school openings, the ceremonial appearances, the grinding institutional grind of a woman doing the public work of the monarchy without the dignity of a defined public role. Almost none of them asked what she might have done with a cabinet position, a ministry, an actual brief in which her intelligence could have been deployed and her public profile put to institutional use. as it is in constitutional monarchies across Europe, where junior royals frequently take on substantive governmental or ambassadorial roles. The question was not asked because it was already too late to answer it, and because asking it required admitting that the institution had made a choice about how to use Margaret, and that the choice had been, from the beginning, not to use her at all. There is a document that has received less attention than it deserves. In 2004, 2 years after Margaret's death, the royal household published the list of her official engagements over the final decade of her active public life. The list runs to several hundred individual appearances, hospital visits, charity galas, regimental anniversaries, school prize givings, civic ceremonies. The full apparatus of British constitutional monarchy's public-facing operation, performed by a woman with a progressive stroke condition, significant vision loss, and the accumulated weight of a lifetime of institutional management. She kept going, through the health problems, through the tabloid coverage, through the Snowdon divorce and the coverage of the Llewellyn affair, and the increasingly vitriolic treatment of her private life as a form of public property. She kept going because that was what she had been trained to do, and because somewhere inside the containment, there was still the original instinct of the person who had been contained. The same instinct that had stood behind the velvet rope at every party looking extraordinary, making the party itself irrelevant by force of personality. The same instinct that had produced the musical knowledge, the genuine artistic engagement, the devastatingly precise imitations of everyone in the room. The instinct, as those who knew her best described it, of a woman who had been told from childhood that she was too much, and who had spent 71 years proving that the people doing the telling were wrong, while the institution spent those same 71 years quietly insisting they were right. The modern British monarchy is a monument that requires a great deal of maintenance. It requires people willing to perform the public function without the private authority. It requires people willing to absorb the scrutiny without the power to respond to it. It requires, in short, people willing to be useful in a contained way, to be visible without being consequential, and to accept the terms of that visibility without complaint. Margaret did not accept the terms without complaint. She complained with every cigarette and every nightclub and every late dinner party and every love affair that the press photographed through a telephoto lens and offered to the public as evidence of recklessness. But she also performed every engagement. She showed up, year after year after year, across 5 decades of patronages that were designed to be full enough to occupy her and empty enough not to empower her. She showed up. The family worked, across those decades, to maintain the public version of what Margaret was, the party girl with the tragic romance, the brilliant woman who wasted herself, the cautionary tale. The cautionary tale was the function. She was the demonstration that the institution's requirements would prevail, that personal desire would lose, that glamour without obedience would be punished by visibility without dignity. Every royal who came after her understood the lesson. It did not need to be stated. It simply needed to be her, standing slightly behind the queen at every public occasion, wearing a better dress, holding a cigarette, demonstrating in the public record exactly what happened to the woman who was too much. The system used her as a warning. She used the warning as a stage. And the gap between those two facts, when laid alongside 50 years of evidence, is not a tragedy, though it contains one. It is the most honest account of the British monarchy available in a single human life. The Battenbergs lost a country and renamed themselves to keep the palace. Margaret Rose Windsor lost a man, a marriage, a career she was never formally offered, and 50 years of consequential work she was never formally trusted to do. She gained instead the most watched life of the 20th century. That was not a consolation prize. It was the sentence. And she served it beautifully, which is the most devastating thing about her, and the thing the obituaries, almost without exception, completely missed.